To learn more about earning college credits with study hall courses, go to gostudyhall.com or click the link in the description. Today, we start our story with someone getting their head chopped off. We end with a former leader dying in prison. And in the middle, you guessed it, more heads are chopped off. But as you'll see, this is really a story of hope. I promise. The Atlantic revolutions are a period of political upheaval that started in the late 18th century when groups of people on both sides of the Atlantic decided the old ways of government just weren't working anymore and it was time to try something new. Along the way, mistakes were made, battles were fought, revolutions succeeded, and revolutions broke down. But even a failed revolution can do a lot to shake up governmental order. Hi, I'm Rob Fuller, and this is Study Hall, Modern World History. The season of revolution during the 18th century wasn't the first period of political upheaval in history, and it certainly wasn't the last. But as folks fixed their attention on the question of what a government owes its citizens, it was certainly a busy time for monarchs struggling to keep their political control and their heads attached to their necks. One of those monarchs was King Charles I of England, who, way back on January 30th, 1649, climbed the stairs outside of the royal palace of Whitehall, laid down, and had his head chopped off. His crime? Treason. To make a long story short, the king and parliament had disagreed about who was in charge of the country. One civil war later, the king lost the argument and his head. But along the way, the dispute got people debating about who they thought was right and what the monarch's job actually was. It wasn't all that different from how you and your friends might talk politics over dinner, and these new ideas stuck around for centuries. For example, these debates inspired thinkers like John Locke, Thomas Hobbes, and Jean-Jacques Rousseau, philosophers who outlined the idea of the social contract. This is the idea that a government isn't just an all-powerful king, but it's an agreement between the people in charge and those not in charge, for everyone's best interest. And even more than that, it's the idea that a government is only legit when most people support it, also known as popular sovereignty. Thoughts like this contributed to a movement called the Enlightenment, which started in the late 1600s and involved thinkers from all over Europe, exploring ideas about universal rights and liberty. For instance, Locke argued that people have rights that no one could take away, not even a king. The rights were admittedly a bit vague, things like life, liberty, and property, but they were valuable. And according to Locke, we're born with these rights. They're natural rights. Together, all these ideas encourage new forms of government. Some people wanted democracies, while others just wanted more freedoms than they had under their current ruler. But in any case, all this rumbling put pressure on the governments that already existed. But here's the thing. Rulers had been born and raised into positions of power and weren't thrilled about the idea of giving it up. Like King Charles I, who gave up his head rather than his power over England. And all this just created some serious tension. When you have a whole heap of citizens asking for rights and the people in charge saying no, well, you've got a problem. And the solution people landed on to these problems was revolution. One of the best examples of this happened about 100 years later in the British colonies of North America, which were soon to become the newly minted United States. Inspired by these Enlightenment ideas, leaders like Thomas Jefferson wanted more say over their government, which kind of makes sense. King George III and Parliament were across an ocean, so what did they know about the problems colonists face? Why should a tiny island across the sea regulate the price of tea? And why did they keep heaping on new taxes, particularly when colonists didn't even have a vote in how these taxes were used? From Jefferson's point of view, no one could make decisions about the colonies better than the colonists. So Jefferson drew from Enlightenment thinkers to draft the most famous document of what would become the American Revolution, the Declaration of Independence. This iconic breakup letter had everything a good conscious uncoupling requires. It included a list of complaints the colonists had with Great Britain, stuff like skyrocketing taxation, a lack of representation in Parliament, and the inability of the king to pick up his wet towel off the bedroom floor. Wait, did my wife write this? It also affirmed the colonists' own values, including the oft-referenced refrain that all men are created equal, and that they had natural rights no one could take away, a la John Locke. The DOI also insisted that governments only work when they have the consent of the governed, and by the late 1700s, these colonists were no longer consenting. So, cue the American Revolution! And 7 bloody years later, the colonies gained independence and became the first Atlantic colony to break free from Britain. So, to zoom out and look at the big picture here, if thinkers like Hobbes and Locke planted the seeds of these ideas in their writings, the American Revolution was the first fruit of this new tree. And that tree was about to become part of a whole orchard. For a whole boatload of reasons that we can't get into right now, France sent 6 warships and over 6,000 troops to help the almost United States in their revolt against Great Britain. Among them was a young nobleman, the Marquis de Lafayette, who served under General George Washington, and when he returned to France, Lafayette took this revolutionary bug back home with him. And considering his military fame and status as a nobleman, this was bad news for the French monarchy. At the time, France was ruled by an absolutist monarch, King Louis XVI. In fact, France hadn't had a meeting of the Estates General, their version of Congress or Parliament, in over 170 years. Louis really subscribed to the whole "this meeting could have been an email" school of thought. So instead, like any responsible person, the king and his wife avoided their problems by throwing absolute ragers, with France footing the bill. And while a lavish party or two isn't enough to run an entire country into economic ruin, Louis XVI's other policies had that more or less already covered. So the king called a meeting of the Estates General to fix these money problems. But these nobles took a look and quickly decided that the financial crisis wasn't the only problem here. In fact, Louis XVI had been doing such a bad job ruling France, these folks decided it was time to completely reform the monarchy. And among those participants was, once again, the Marquis de Lafayette. While Lafayette believed France should have a king, he didn't think that monarch should be all-powerful. Instead, he worked with his old friend, Thomas Jefferson, to write the first draft of the Declaration of the Rights of Man and of the Citizen in 1789. Like the DOI over in America, this declaration stated that the king had an obligation to respect the natural rights of his people, and argued against the idea of nobility altogether. It argued that a person's success should be based on their skill and effort, not their ancestry. And in 18th century France, those were some fighting words. Now, let's get out of here before the blood starts to spurt and we have absolutely traumatized our animators. So, while the Declaration didn't start the French Revolution, it did lay out the values that were fought over. Now, I did mention heads getting chopped off, and guillotines were definitely a part of the French Revolution. When someone opposed the budding new government, they were accused of treason and beheaded accordingly. Ultimately, up to 17,000 people were executed via guillotine, including the party god himself, Louis XVI. This may have kept the executioner in business, but the French people ultimately failed in their quest of total governmental overhaul. For after all was said and done, France didn't get an equal society or a government everyone could participate in. And by 1815, the monarchy had been restored under Louis XVI's kid brother, King Louis XVIII. But everything wasn't back to square one. See, France had its nose in a whole bunch of other European countries at this time, and these revolutionary ideas about government, natural rights, and popular sovereignty began to spread fast. Going back to that whole tree and orchard metaphor, France was now running around the continent throwing seeds around like confetti. And this inspired the citizens of other countries like Spain, Poland, Greece, and the states that would become Italy and Germany to also fight for their rights as citizens. And by the early 19th century, almost all European countries had started using written constitutions instead of just handing over political power based on birth. And this movement didn't just stop with Europe. The ideas enshrined in the Declaration of Independence and the Declaration of the Rights of Man and of the Citizen also inspired Creoles in South America like Simón Bolívar and José de San Martín to fight for and win independence from Spanish rule. But if anyone could out-drama the French in their revolutionary practice, it was the Haitians. When the French Revolution began in 1789, what is now called Haiti was still a part of the French Empire. Then known as Saint-Domingue, this region was France's most profitable colony and the world's leading producer of sugar and coffee. And the reason Saint-Domingue was able to export so much of this stuff was the plantation farming system, which mercilessly exploited the labor of enslaved people for profit. 500,000 enslaved peoples worked on the plantations in Saint-Domingue. By comparison, there were only 32,000 white people on the island to go along with 28,000 gens de couleur, or people of color, these being black and mixed-race Haitians who weren't enslaved. The gens de couleur often owned plantations and enslaved people, just like their white neighbors did, but they weren't considered French citizens. This meant they'd never have the same rights as those white neighbors. And this really complicated things over in France. Because if everyone was born with natural rights, then, well, everyone would include people regardless of their skin color, wouldn't it? And what did it mean for the gens de couleur? When Lafayette and co. created the Rights of Man and of the Citizen, they did try to address this, saying that free people were born with these rights regardless of race, but the white citizens of Saint-Domingue straight up ignored this and refused to give rights to their gens de couleur neighbors. This triggered an explosion of violence and protest over racial inequality. And quickly, these protests expanded to be about slavery too, which the Rights of Man and of the Citizen conveniently failed to mention. When white plantation owners tried to stop these protests with lynchings and violence, the situation turned into a full-blown slave revolt. And that was finally enough to get the attention of the French revolutionaries. So, in 1794, the French government just banned slavery altogether. Only, there was still a problem, and it was the same problem actually. Many of the colonists just ignored the ban. So the enslaved people took matters into their own hands. A formerly enslaved person named Toussaint Louverture became the leader of the revolution, bringing together formerly enslaved black Haitians and the mixed-race gens de couleur. They not only fought, but they won, and they won in the most successful uprising of enslaved people in all of history. And in 1801, Louverture officially declared Saint-Domingue's independence from France, forming the new nation of Haiti. Now, it took a few years for that independence to stick. Ultimately, Louverture was arrested, died in prison, and new leaders had to rise to fill his shoes. And while Haiti officially gained independence in 1804, France still forced them to pay reparations, which seriously impacted the Haitian economy for centuries to come. But the political and racial impacts of the revolution were huge. Haiti not only gained independence, but became the first republic led by black men in the Americas. Natural rights had been won for both the free and the formerly enslaved. Revolutions are often remembered for their violence. There are military battles, uprisings by the peoples, and executions. In our short time together, we started off with someone getting their head chopped off and ended with someone dying in prison. But revolutions are about more than bloodshed. The changes that swept the globe in this era demonstrated the power of regular people around the world to act collectively and inspire real political change. Of course, there was still a huge ways to go. These early ideas that all men were created equal and that all men had certain inalienable rights were imperfect. They excluded women. And while slavery was outlawed in certain places, it was still supported in others. At the dawn of the 19th century, the ideals of the social contract were still a far way from reality, but they planted the seeds that began to grow across the world, and that in many ways are still blooming today. If you're enjoying Study Hall Modern World History and are interested in taking online courses and earning college credits, go to gostudyhall.com or click on this button to learn more. Thanks for watching. See you next time.